Hello and welcome. This is Jenna from McGuire. Today I wanted to revisit a technique I did a while ago. I'll link to the first video I did here, but I'm going to show you how to add color to texture paste and actually use that colored texture paste to color some stamped images so you get lots of fun texture. This is what I did for the peeps that you see on this card here. It's perfect for these little peeps and it's very easy to do. But first I wanted to give you a look at the inks that I'll be using in today's video. These are my favorite things, dye inks. I really like this ink a lot. It's a little unique. It's almost like a hybrid ink, but it is a dye ink. And it has a sponge pad, which is a little bit different for dye inks. Now, I found that this ink is marvelous and works well if it is good and juicy. So I like to re-ink this ink often. The good thing is that the reinkers are available in all the colors and they're very inexpensive. This reinker will last you for a long time and you can use it for many other things besides just inking up your ink pad, which I'm going to show you in today's video. They have a ton of colors and cardstock to match these colors, and you can see some of the colors there in the background. I'll be using some of those today. I'll put a link to a video with more information about those inks here. So before we put those inks to good use, we need to get our die cut piece in the background there. I'm using this die set from My Favorite Things that does a cut down the center, so you can see the rectangle cut in the center, but it also does these diagonal stitch lines on both sides of the cut line, which I think is fantastic because it gives a fun finished edge to both pieces, both the positive and the negative. I'll only be using the positive space here today, but they'd be fun to use together, or you can use the negative space for maybe like a shaker card window. So this is the stamp set from My Favorite Things that I'll be using today. I just think it's so much fun. I'm using the message that says to one of my favorite peeps and also the stamp of the peep. And by the way, there is a die set that goes along with this. Now I am using an acrylic block from My Favorite Things. This is a nice large round one with grid lines, and I use these grid lines a lot along with the grid lines on my work surface to make sure I stamp straight. I'm going to ink up this stamp with Versamark ink. We're going to heat emboss it. You can see me lining up my piece with the grid lines in the background on my work surface. And then I'm going to line up those grid lines with the grid lines on my acrylic block when I go to stamp this. It's kind of hard to see in the video because they're faint, but this really helps me make sure that I get my image centered and I get my image straight. There are a lot of acrylic blocks out there that have grid lines. I like these because they are round. And I have a cutting mat with a grid printed on it underneath a craft sheet. So that's what you see on the background there, and I'll link to a video that shows how I do that. I find it's a great work surface. Okay, so I am adding some platinum embossing powder onto this. This is a product from Ranger that I just love. It's kind of a warm silver color. So I'm putting that on there, and then I will get my heat gun good and hot before I bring it to the paper, and that keeps it from warping. So now it's time for the fun part where we get to add our little peeps. I want to make sure that I center them well. So I'm going to do a straight line down the center with a pencil. So I've got my little peep here. I decided I wanted to do 4 on here. I don't know why. I usually do things in odd numbers, but I decided on 4 today. I'm going to take my T-ruler and put a little mark halfway across my piece here. I love this T-ruler. I think it's such a good tool to have. So I'm putting a mark halfway along this piece, which is 2 1/8 that happens to be. And then I am going to flip the T-ruler to go the other direction so that I can draw a line at that little mark. So this is my center line. That's really the only guideline I'm going to use on this. I just want to make sure that I have 2 peeps on one side and 2 peeps on the other side of this line. There are a lot of different ways you can go about making sure that these are kind of spaced evenly, but I find this was the quickest and the easiest. Now it's time to go ahead and stamp our peeps. I'm using 3 My Favorite Things dye inks. I'm using Daffodil, Summer Splash, and Coral Crush. Now let me tell you about one of the things I really like about this dye ink in particular. Now most dye inks, when you stamp with them, they stain your stamp. That's okay. It's not a problem. Stained stamps still work just fine. However, sometimes it's hard to clean the color off enough that it doesn't transfer to your next stamped image. Like say you stamp with a blue ink, it's hard to clean off that blue ink so that when you stamp a yellow ink, you don't get like a green. Well, this My Favorite Things dye ink seems to clean off the stamps much better. It doesn't stain as much. I wouldn't say it doesn't stain completely, but it's much friendlier to your stamps. And I don't feel like I get the transfer of color with these inks. So that is one of the perks. If that's something that bothers you about dye inks, this might be a good ink for you to consider. There are so many different things that are good about all the inks out there, but that's one of my favorite things about this one in particular. You can see here how clean this stamp is, even though we used it with a lot of ink. Okay, so now it's time to add our paste on top. I'm actually using texture paste today. It's a product from Ranger. Any kind of paste would work here, embossing paste, molding paste, whatever you want. I just like embossing paste and texture paste the most. I put a tiny bit on my craft sheet, and now I'm putting 1 drop of reinker in from the My Favorite Things Coral Crush Dye Reinker. Now you can see a little bit of that color goes a long way here in making this a nice, vibrant color. So I'm just using a palette knife to kind of mix it up here on my craft sheet. If you don't have a craft sheet, you could do this onto a piece of scrap plastic and mix your color up on there. But I just kind of flip it around a little bit here just to mix the color in, and then we're good to go. Remember to keep the lid on your paste jar, by the way. You don't want that to dry out. So I have a little bit on my work surface here. I am going to actually apply it with this little micro brush. This is a tool that I use to kind of apply adhesive into tiny areas or move things around. If you don't have a micro brush, no worries. You could use a toothpick for this, or you could even use a fine paintbrush and clean it off really well when you're done. So I put a blob of this colored texture paste onto my little peep, and I'm just kind of pushing it and moving it around with the tip of this micro brush. Again, you could use any tool you want here. You could even use a craft knife to push your color around. So I'm just going to push it into all the areas. I kind of started in the biggest area, and now I'm going to fill in his ears here. And it's actually easier than you would think to kind of push this around. Now, once you're done, you can kind of smooth over it with the back of the microbrush or just tap it lightly with your finger. And that just smooths a little bit of the texture out, so you only end up with a little bit of texture at the end. Now, if you don't have any texture paste or embossing paste, you could use heat embossing here and just heat emboss the images to get a little bit of texture. But the texture you get from these pastes and adding it on top of the stamped images is just fantastic. It's really raised, and it goes well with this idea of these little peeps. Now, in the past, I have done a video where I actually did ice cream cones with colored embossing paste, and I'll link to that one here too. And by the way, you really don't want to let that texture paste dry on your work surface and on your palette knife, so I just use a baby wipe to clean it up pretty quickly. It cleans up pretty easily. Now I want to add a little sparkle to our peep, so I'm taking a pinch of Elizabeth Craft Designs Cool Highlights glitter. This is a super fine glitter that's just beautiful. And I'm just kind of adding a pinch of it over our little peep there. Since he's still a little bit wet, it will hold some of that glitter. I tapped a little bit of the excess off on the side in my trash can, but I'm going to leave the rest on there, and later we can kind of rub away any excess after it has dried. So I'm going to do another peep here. This time I'm using a drop of the Summer Splash Reinker in my texture paste, and I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the other one. Now, there is a peep die that My Favorite Things offers also. You could instead die cut from some plastic or a piece of scrap cardstock, die cut the peep, and use that as a stencil, the negative space as a stencil to apply the texture paste over it. I didn't do that for 2 reasons. One, I liked the size of the stamped image, and I wanted to be able to show you how you could cover a stamped image with colored texture paste. But also, I want, by applying the texture paste like this, like kind of pushing it around, it gives it texture. When you take a palette knife over a stencil, it kind of smooths it out. And I wanted this to be thick and textured, so I get the look of a peep, or kind of what a peep looks like in real life. I'm keeping the rest of this card pretty simple, so I really wanted to make sure I made these peeps stand out. Okay, so once I've covered my little peep here, I'm just going to take my finger and kind of press it down just to smooth it out ever so slightly, but I do want to keep some of that texture there. And one more thing about these micro brushes. I've used them before to push adhesive around and stuff. These are very inexpensive, and you can clean it up and reuse them if you want to. I think there's 100 in my little container, but you can kind of wipe the tip off and reuse it between the colors. I only used one for this card, and I'll save it to use again later. Okay, so I needed to know how the eyes are on the peeps. So I Googled peeps so that I could make sure that my eyes are in the right place. So I'm just taking a black pen, a black multi-liner Copic pen, and I am drawing the eyes and the nose on. Now, I didn't notice that this damaged my marker at all. If you're unsure, you could use a different type of marker just to be safe. But I didn't have any problems. And if any of the glitter got on the tip of my marker, I just wiped it off with my finger. So I did put glitter on all of these peeps, and you just knock the excess off. But the paste holds some of that glitter and paste, so you get some nice texture and shine. Now I've cut a super tiny yellow card here. This is the daffodil cardstock from My Favorite Things that matches that ink. I've also cut a small piece of white craft foam, and that is going to be sandwiched between our stamped panel and the note card so that it has some even raised dimension. And you can see here that fun little bit of shine and texture that we have on our peeps. So that's all there is to this card. I hope you'll give this technique a try of adding some reinkers to your texture paste to color some of your stamped images. If you're interested in the products I use, I link them below in my YouTube description as always, or you can head over to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com where I'll link to much more information. Thanks so much for watching, and if this was helpful, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube knows you want to see more from me. Thanks so much.